to be on the challenges of making tenements energy efficient. So right now, Jacqueline's touched upon a number of things, and before we get on to talking about the challenges of retrofit, it's probably just important to sort of recap or highlight the existing challenges that tenement owners have currently. So first of all, it's just the state of repair in Scotland of tenement buildings. So just under half of the housing stock in Scotland has disrepair to critical elements of the building. And for pre-1919 flats, those historic buildings, often the sandstone buildings, this figure rises to 2/3. So there's a significant amount of disrepair particularly to older buildings. And a lot of work needs to be done to keep to address the fabric issues, as we call them, when it comes to keeping those buildings warm and dry. Now, with the repair challenges, again, Jacqueline's touched upon a lot of these regarding the issues around owners that can't pay or owners that refuse to pay their share once a repair or maintenance has been agreed to, or even improvement. And there's also issues around owners associations not being able to sign contracts. So when somebody signs a contract to get the repair work done, it's owners associations are not incorporated. So if the contractor wanted to challenge that, they would come after the person or people that signed the contract. So it's something to think about. And also is a challenge for people and a concern and an understandable one. And there's also issues around just the funds. I mean, we were in a cost of living crisis already, but above and beyond that, fixing a roof is going to cost each owner, if it's a full roof repair, thousands of pounds each. It's not a patch repair. So just lacking and there isn't really funding available for the most part from government sources, local or national, to address repair to tenement buildings, only in specific circumstances. So it's really important for owners to be able to put money aside to address that. And historically, people have not, when a lot of the housing stock changed in the 80s, were not fully aware that they would be responsible for a share of the full repair costs in it, because in that situation, usually the council would have done so. And councils have certainly stepped back over the last 20 to 30 years due to the increasing demand and cost of providing grants to homeowners when it comes to repair issues. So those are the existing challenges just generally for tenement owners. Now, when you get into the issue of retrofit and energy efficiency, there's a whole new set of problems. So one of the first things that's important to talk about is, obviously in this context, is climate change in Scotland's homes. And that right now, the housing sector is the third largest cause of greenhouse gas emissions in Scotland. And Scotland has a legal obligation to reach net zero overall, and the housing sector has a part to play in that. And they're going to, in order to do that, there needs to be changes to the way that we heat our buildings and keep our buildings warm. So with that in mind, there are significant challenges on this issue when it comes to tenement owners. So first of all, one of the things that is highlighted in this area when it comes to sort of energy efficiency work is the question of just defining whether or not something is a common or individual responsibility, and what it would take, whether or not it's repair and maintenance or whether it's improvement. So first of all, sort of just determining whether or not something that needed to be done that was around energy efficiency was common or individual work. Insulation is one of the things that's been is considered. If you're putting insulation in a building, obviously that would be a common repair. It gets a little bit more tricky when you're talking about loft spaces. So if you're on the top floor, insulation that didn't sort of affect the structure of the roof would be something that would be individual, something that for the most part, insulation that did get into that area would be a common repair. And now that one thing about it, and it kind of depends on the situation, but the one thing that is clear is that putting in insulation is considered repair and maintenance. So it needs a majority. It doesn't need everyone to agree. So even though you would think, well, putting insulation in would improve the energy efficiency, in the context of what the Tenement Act says, actually insulation would be repair and maintenance and only need a majority to go forward. But when it comes specifically to insulation, there's some significant challenges when it comes to, particularly with historic buildings, first of all. So if you're thinking about the old sandstone buildings, first of all, there's an aesthetic issue. Those are old historic tenement buildings, what we call pre-1919 buildings, oftentimes have a certain just beauty to them. And so slapping on insulation on the outside of those buildings, first of all, would destroy that aesthetic value. So there's something to be said about that. But there's also practical reasons as well. A lot of those older buildings use sandstone, and putting insulation on the exterior of that would cause that to dry out. Those kinds of buildings were built to breathe. So water moves in and water moves out over the course of the seasons as they turn. If you put insulation on there, it would seal it up, dry it out, and you've got crumbling sandstone, and you're potentially putting the structure of the building at risk. So that's a significant problem when it comes to just if you're just talking about, well, the solution to this is to insulate. It's not so easy putting external insulation. Internal insulation has its own issues. First of all, just by the very nature of tenement flats, there's not a lot of space. Internal insulation work can be very disruptive, and even though it may not take a huge amount of time because you're talking about sort of just one flat with a few bedrooms, you're still talking about having to decant from the flat. If you're in a detached or semi-detached home, you might be able to move to the other side of the building, or for sleeping arrangements upstairs over the course of a week. You're probably going to find that much more difficult to do in a tenement flat. So it's very disruptive, and just by its very nature, tenement flats are small. So there's issues around that. There's also issues too. If you do insulation in your flat, you potentially you're not necessarily fixing the problem, because the heat will just be escaping through. It will find a way. So if not everyone is doing the insulation, if it's just you, then your basically heat will dissipate into other flats rather than outdoors, because you've got drafts and other issues that need to be addressed with. So those are some of the tricky bits when it comes to insulation. Moving on to a sort of a separate issue, which is the zero carbon heating systems. Now, these are where you would hear talk about, particularly around heat pumps. And heat pumps work. There's a lot of sort of talk about whether or not heat pumps will work in Scotland. They do. There are certainly plenty of buildings that use heat pumps. Currently, there's more being installed all the time. The problem with heat pumps in the situation that we're talking about with tenement flats has to do, first of all, with there's a number of issues. One is the available space for installation and upkeep. By its very definition, tenement flats are going to have a limited amount of space. That's not always, the case in modern flats, which are also defined as tenements. That would be possibly less of an issue. There might be space in the green area outside. But if you're talking about sort of urban tenements where there might be a back garden or might not even be a back garden, you've got an issue of space when it comes to an individual heat pump. And you're talking about that just providing heat, zero carbon heat for one flat. Multiply that by all the people in the building. If they all wanted to do that, and you've pretty much, there's your back garden gone. You might be able to put them up on the roof if you've got a flat roof. But you got to make sure you have access to it, because in case things do get broken, just like gas boilers, they need maintenance. There's also issues, as we talked about, whether or not where that's the issue of the common area of the building. So oftentimes the Tenement Act will define the close to the stair as a common area, and everybody's responsible for it. Oftentimes back gardens, as Jacqueline was talking about, are also common, though that's something that you would check the title deeds. But let's say, for example, it is common space. You need to think about the fact that the other owners, even though you want to put a heat pump into your into your situation. That's an air source heat pump. Those are the kinds that sit above ground. There are also ground source heat pumps, which dig down into the ground. Space is often a big problem with that, having to drill down into a borehole. You can imagine the problems of doing that in an urban setting. Air source heat pumps, where it has a unit outdoors, presents a problem of other owners agreeing to that because it sits on a common area and they would have a say over that. And they may not want, particularly the ground floor tenants may not want that unit sitting outside of their flat. And there's also on that similar issue too, is that whether or not energy efficiency, net zero carbon heating systems is considered repair and maintenance or considered improvement. There's nothing in the Tenement Act currently that defines it. So the general default position for most people is that those would be considered improvement, and you would need every owner to agree to allow you to put an individual heat pump in the back garden. You can see where air source heat pumps are going to be a particularly tricky one as far as sort of dealing with, particularly with historic buildings. There's also a number of issues too about potentially needing a greater radiator space for them as well. There are some potential solutions to or workarounds on that, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But also some of the issues around zero carbon heating systems right now. This is more general, actually, not necessarily around tenements, but is the issue around electricity. Right now, electricity is expensive. It didn't used to be that way prior to the war in Ukraine, for example. But electricity now, which in Scotland is produced through hydroelectric and through wind, so it's a zero carbon produced, so that's good. But whether or not the cost of it is cost effective. So if you put in a heat pump right now, research from WWF has shown that ultimately you are not going to be saving money in the long term for an individual heat pump. Which would, of course, put people off as well, even though they wanted to do their bit to get us to net zero in Scotland. And there's also the issue of the load on the network. It's certainly been raised by multiple professionals that the electricity grid is not ready for everyone to be moving certainly quickly to electricity to heat their homes. So there needs to be significant work done in the private sector to address those issues. Now, there are some attempts to some legislative changes that are coming that may make it easier on all those fronts. So those are just a few of the issues that I wanted to raise as far as sort of challenges. But there is possible solutions. So first of all, you've got the Parliamentary Working Group on Tenement Maintenance, which under one roof sits as secretariat for. So we organize the meetings. And those are sat on by factors, landlords, local authorities, architects, surveyors. It's basically anyone that sort of has a professional qualification and would be able to contribute and wishes to contribute to that sits on this working group. It's a cross-party working group, so it's one of those issues, tenement repair and maintenance, that sort of isn't really party political. It's something that I think all parties recognize the need for something to be done on. In 2019, there was 3 proposals that were put forward by this working group. One was create the ability for building funds to be established and a lot easier to be maintained. So owners could be putting money into building funds and let those grow over the years. So when it came time to fix the roof, it wasn't a huge sticker shock. Yes, you'd have to probably put in a chunk of money, but it would be significantly less than if you had to pay for it all at once. So that would help address some of the issues. Another was 5-year tenement inspections. Churches in Scotland are required to have an inspection every 5 years. But tenement buildings are not. And so having the buildings inspected 5 years would go a significant way, as if you know and have sold a property or bought a property, the home report has a section that deals with the condition of the building, but it is very threadbare. It's usually someone standing outside the building giving an eyeball. It's not really going to tell you the actual condition of the building, whether or not there's going to be work that needs to be done, so you can make an informed choice. So that would be something that is also been put forward by the group. Finally is owners associations. And these are all things that Scottish Government took from the Parliament and said, yes, we want to do things on this. So what they did with owners association is they've handed that over to the Law Commission. Now, the Scottish Law Commission's job is to take a look at potential legislation and see what any potential legal barriers are and make proposals of how it would fit in legislation. That is particularly tricky when it comes to tenement housing, because as Jacqueline talked about, the importance of title deeds and how they interact compared to the Tenement Act. So your title deeds are always take primary, and then it's the Tenement Act if your title deeds don't make sense or if they're silent on an issue. So they've taken that issue and they've taken a long look at it. They're putting out a consultation paper in April. We've had an indication of what that's going to look like, and there's going to be significant changes around that. But one of them is for mandatory owners association. And I think the recommendation will be is that essentially, if you are in a defined tenement building, you and your other owners will automatically become part of an owners association. So you won't have to form one. You will just be part of it. And you will have to have someone a volunteer manager, that sort of, the person that would normally organize a residents or owners association meeting. You have to meet once a year, and you'd have to set some sort of budget to look at repairs over the course of the year. How much you would have to do would probably be up to you. So those are some of the things around owners association that would get rid of the issue of contractors being able to go after one owner. It would be the owners association they would be dealing with. It's not something that's going to solve all the problems, but it will get people talking, and that is something that would go a long way to helping people start figuring out what they need to do to address the issues of building disrepair. Now, getting back to energy efficiency, there's also something called the Heat and Buildings Bill. That is out for consultation now. That consultation closes on March 8th. At the end of this document, I've got some links where you could contribute to that and the thoughts on that. But that's out for consultation. It's a significant document, and as far as sort of what it's looking for are listed there as far as its main points. Largely, it's the headlines are getting rid of polluting heating systems after 2045. So that's 21 years from now, I believe. Requiring certain requirements around those purchasing a home as far as using polluting heating systems within a fixed period following the sale. Not before the sale, requiring homeowners to meet a minimum energy efficiency standard by 2033 and private landlords by 2028. And some of the things within that, having looked a little bit deeper into it, would, for example, if you are a homeowner and you're putting in a energy efficient, you're putting in a zero carbon heating system, you may not have to meet those energy efficiency requirements. The Scottish Government, I think, takes the opinion of that if you are willing to pay the money to run the heat pump or whatever the system you wanted to use. District heating is another one that you would be able to without doing energy efficiency work. But it would be in your best interest, of course, to make your flat energy efficient, because you will say not have to run the heating as much. Now, private landlords will have to meet that requirement on energy efficiency standards, because of course they're not the ones paying the bills when it comes to heating systems. It's the tenants that do so. So they will be required to put in a minimum level of efficiency. There's going to be a lot of there will be exemptions on this. There will be certain buildings that you're just not able to get to this standard because of what kind of a building it is, what kind of building types were used. It's a historic building, so there may be ways out of that. One of the other things to chat about on this is I talked down heat pumps as a solution for tenements, but one of the probable solutions for this is district heating, and that's the idea that there would be a central heating system that would heat hot water in your community, and then it would pump it through pipes into your building, but also all your neighbors. So other buildings, businesses, single, detached, and detached homes, and that would cover a certain area. That would solve the problem, obviously, because you wouldn't have to put the heating system on the grounds. You would just have a unit within your flat. The difficulties with that is that you kind of have to, in one sense, you have to wait for that to come to you. Within the heat and buildings bill, though, the consultation, it does say that if you are in a identified area where in each local authority, including a South Ayrshire, and I'll put a link up in the next slide here to show you that. In fact, I can put that up now, actually, and move on to the next slide there. The South Ayrshire Heat and Energy Efficiency Strategy, LHES. Each council is responsible for putting one of these up. They include maps, so you can take a look and see where your flats are if you're a landlord, and see if you're in that area. But if it's identified as an area where there would be district heating would be identified as coming in, you would not be required to put in any other system until the point at which that district heating came to your home. So in other words, if a deadline was approaching, but you were in an area that where it was identified there was district heating was going to eventually be there, then you would be exempt from hitting that deadline because you could wait until the district heating came along. And then once the district heating came along, you have the choice to join it, or you can do another solution if you've got another solution as far as heating systems. So what this is what steps you can take to address these challenges. So one of the things you can take a look at is some of the work that's being done by community-led organizations, two of which we've identified there as local homes and the Edinburgh Building Retrofit and Improvement Collective, Edinbrick. These are community organizations that try to work within with neighbors in certain areas. Local Homes covers Glasgow, Edinburgh, obviously Edinburgh. And there are other ones that I think are being started up in other places in Scotland. But the idea is that you work with your neighbors on energy efficiency issues. So you might have someone come and take a look at your flat from the community who's got some interest in retrofit work, in energy efficiency work, and help you with doing draft proofing, for example, in your flat, and identify other areas such as the windows you might be able to save some energy in. And so that is, and save and keep your flat warmer. So those are some of the community-led projects. You can take a look at the work that they're doing on there. It's quite interesting what they're doing from a community level, very neighborhood-based level. There is some existing funding around energy efficiency and retrofit work. If you go to homeenergyscotland.org/funding, you can see what's available. So there is some funding that is available from Scottish Government around this. They are also looking for pilot projects from tenement flat owners. I said individual heat pumps is going to be a difficult challenge to overcome. However, there is now there are organizations that are looking for tenement flats that are interested in doing pilot projects to have a communal heat pump. So you'd have one heat pump for the entire building. And that is something that might be a solution to that issue. Of course, with heat pumps, there's lots of different ways to do it. You can have the ground source heat pump, as I talked about earlier, but there's also air to air. You might be familiar with those if you've ever done any holidays in Europe. You'll often see rectangle units in certain rooms, and that is something which connects to a unit that sticks out the back. Those are essentially oftentimes air conditioning units if you're in Spain, but those also work on the same principle and can provide heat as well. And those are run by electricity, because the electricity is generated in Scotland without the use of coal or gas. That makes it zero carbon solution. There is the projects that we're trying to work on. So we're Under One Roof is linked up with a project with Strathclyde University to try to work with factors and to work with homeowners, talking to their factors about what information that they need to progress under energy efficiency work in their buildings. As you may or may not know, factors are quite prevalent in the west of Scotland and not in the rest of the Scotland. So in Edinburgh in the north, you will not see as quite nearly as many factored buildings as you do in the west of Scotland, in the Glasgow and west of Scotland areas. So it's much more likely that you will see factors in that part of the country than you will in others. So we're trying to do some work to provide them with toolkits, provide owners with ways that they can talk to the factor about progressing energy efficiency issues. Finally, like I said, there's a couple of consultations that are out. The South Ayrshire LHE's strategy closes April 10th. I'd really encourage you to check out that link, and maybe we can put it into the chat if it's not already there, to see what South Ayrshire is thinking as far as sort of their strategy for this. All councils are responsible for it. Some of them already have them out, so you can take a look at what other councils are doing, but you have the opportunity to respond back to that consultation as a member of the public. That closes on April 10th. Closing a little bit sooner, which is much bigger of a thing, is the heat and buildings bill consultation, which I talked about at length in the last slide, and you, of course, have the ability to contribute to that. If you've never looked at a consultation response before, there will be 25 questions in this particular one, I think. You don't have to answer them all. You can just answer the ones that are, you certainly answer the ones only, or give your thoughts on the ones that directly affect you. There will be a lot of things in there potentially that wouldn't have anything to do particularly with something that would concern you as a tenement flat owner, but you could put your comments in there. There's an extensive document that goes into detail about what they're thinking as far as the rules and why. So you would read that ahead of time, give yourself a little time. It's quite an extensive document. That consultation will close on March 8th and expects probably to be laid down for into a form of a bill in the fall. So you would expect that would be go through the legislative process over the course of the second half of 2024. And go into legislation should it pass in 2025. Probably we're getting at that point a little bit close to election time around there as well. So those are some of the things that you can do to sort of have your say on this issue. But I wanted just to thank you for listening to that. And if anyone has any questions, be happy to take that both on this issue or on if there's anything on tenement management or maintenance more generally.
Thank you.
Jacqueline, can I ask you?
And a lot of information, Mike.
Yeah, so there's a lot of information. Yeah, hopefully it's people have found it useful. One question maybe for you, Jacqueline. What are I know you touched upon it a little bit, but what are the options as far as getting in touch with another owner if you can't reach them?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you can't get in contact with the owner, i.e. by like knocking on the door and establishing whether they actually live there or not, then you would be looking at doing a little bit of investigation work. So your first point of call may be to check the landlord registration website to see if they are a registered landlord. It might be that you want to go onto Registers of Scotland and have a look for the title deed to find out who the legal owner is. And it might well be that you need to reach out to Kyle or one of his colleagues to get assistance from the council's empty home service to see if there's anything that they can do to help you establish who the owner is and a way to get in contact with them. It's something that we've got resources on our website about how to contact people, tracing them if they're private landlords, if they're an absentee owner, as well as, general pointers on the best way to go about actually approaching people. So lots of good resources there.
Kyle, can I bring you into the conversation for a minute here?
Sure, yeah.
So you... do you occasionally get people in touch that are trying to track down other owners and as far as sort of in their building? And if so, I wonder if there's been any sort of trends as far as sort of what the difficulty is, what the barrier is, and is an issue of someone trying to avoid being contacted, or is it just a matter of they just didn't know that someone was trying to reach out to them?
Yeah, we do get this quite a lot. There's not really a specific trend. I think it's more likely what you were saying there is just people not knowing that they're trying to be contacted. Like Jacqueline said, we're more than happy to help owners trying to arrange the initial kind of meeting, and doing what we can to progress the communal repair. If somebody comes to me and asks for details, obviously with GDPR and things like that, we can't just give out anything that we hold to anybody that asks, kind of thing. But I'm more than happy to send an email or make a phone call if we've got that information, or send a letter out and just ask if there's any chance that we can pass on the details, or if they could maybe get in touch with the owner, because they're trying to arrange communal repairs.
Great. That's great to hear. Well, we haven't gotten any more questions in. Hopefully that means that we've just covered every question that anyone would possibly have. But of course, if not, you can go to our website and drop Jacqueline a question over at the Ask a Tenement Expert section of the website. We'd really encourage you, if you want to keep up with all the legislative issues, all of the sort of, and the things I think that commonly come in with those inquiries, which will probably be something that would be helpful for you to know, is to sign up to our newsletter. It's right on the front page. It's easy to do. Of course, we have any number of social media accounts that will update it usually 2-3 times a week, where we'll post some content that might be interesting or helpful for you about issues that tenement owners in Scotland face when trying to organize repairs or maintenance or trying to do retrofit work. So we'd encourage you to follow us along. You can easily find us by just doing a search on LinkedIn or Twitter or Under One, Facebook or Instagram for Under One Roof Scotland, and you'll be able to find us. So just finally, I'd like to thank Jacqueline and Kyle for presenting today, and for coming along today, Kyle, and being available to talk to other people in South Ayrshire who have issues around this. And finally, thank you for all of us who joined us today. We'll be sending copies of this video and as well as the links, and also a feedback survey. It's quick, it's easy to fill out, but it really makes a difference as far as how we shape these going forward. We read every single one, and we are always tweaking our presentations. We're also able to use those if we get, particularly with good feedback, we use those to help us continue to make the case to local government and Scottish government that we deserve to get funding for another year to allow us to keep doing this free service for you. So we'd encourage you to do that if you could. But leaving it at that, I'd like to thank all the guests and thank you for coming along, and keep in touch. Hopefully we will talk to you again soon. So thanks for attending, and have a good afternoon.